You're listening to the Thrive Podcast, where every week we dive into a practical, tactical tip to bring you from a life of simply surviving to thriving. It's personal development for the everyday girl who is done with coasting through her days, done with feeling like she's missing out on the deeper meaning of her own life, and done with mediocrity once and for all. Because it's not enough to simply survive. You deserve to thrive. Welcome back to Thrive. You are in for a treat today. I am talking with my new friend Cait about her new book, Adventures in Opting Out, a field guide to leading an intentional life. Our conversation touches on so many important things that are all the more relevant to head into a new year, from switching the negative script that might automatically run through your brain to practically assessing risk. We talk about creating change and transformation in your life through self-loving instead of self-loathing, and how to process, let go of, and even grieve relationships in life that may be challenged by your own decision to opt out of one path and onto another. Stay tuned through this conversation. Drop it 5 stars if you like what you're listening to. And without further ado, welcome Cait.
Oh my gosh, thank you for having me.
Yay! I'm so happy and honored to have you on Thrive today, Cait. Kick us off by introducing yourself to everybody and telling us a little bit about your background and your story, because you are such an interesting person.
Oh my gosh. Well, now I'm like, what makes me so interesting? But okay, so I am a writer from the West Coast of Canada. And actually, even honestly, up until maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I don't know that that's a word I would have even used to describe myself, even though I wrote a blog for years. Like, I was actively writing all the time. But I think until it became my job, it was just a hard one to identify as. I don't know why. It's like, it's just an interesting one, right? Like, it's technically a thing you do all the time, and yet unless you're getting paid for it or something, we don't call ourselves that. It's like the same way with artists. Like, artists have a hard time calling themselves artists, even though what they do all the time is create.
I feel that because I blog too, and I'm until it became my job, I actually had the same thing as you. Once I came out with a book, I was like, oh, I can kind of now add writer to my resume, but I was doing it for 7+ years and wasn't like, I'm a writer.
Yeah. So now, I mean, I said writer, and now I'm like, I'm an author because technically that is what I do full time for a living, is whether, like, because of my first book, it did much better than I would say I could have ever dreamed of, especially sort of just being like from a little island, and you write a book and you kind of think some people will like it, and then a lot of people buy it. So that changed everything though. And so I went from being someone who I blogged for years, first about paying off debt, second about doing a challenge where I didn't buy anything for a year. Actually, I didn't buy anything for 2 years, but my book is about the first year of that. I wrote about a year of doing like simple living experiments, and then a bit of travel, and ultimately, got a book deal for the year of less. And that changed a lot of things. And so now I actually don't blog at all. I don't also talk about things like money anymore. And not because I don't love to. Like, money is still one of my favorite topics in a way, but it just doesn't come up as much with what I do now. But I've continually made a bunch of shifts, and ultimately now I've sort of, I guess, coined them as opt-outs. Like, I've made a bunch of changes where the way I was living didn't feel right anymore, and so I changed it in some way, and that is what my new book is about.
I love it.
So yeah.
I love it. Well, we're going to dive very deep into your new book, but actually, since you mentioned it, can you fill everybody in on what the Year of Less is? Because I didn't actually know about the Year of Less when I first learned about your new book, and then I looked into that and was like, okay, I need this. I feel convicted. So tell everybody what that is, especially since we have like a new year on the horizon. This is a really cool experiment and concept for people.
Yeah, so first I'll speak to just what it was. So The Year of Less is a book about a year where I decided to not buy anything new for a year. unless it was something I absolutely needed. So I've joked about it, but it is true. Like if you run out of things like deodorant or toothpaste, like buy more of that stuff, right? Like so you're not depriving yourself and like trying to make everything yourself all at once or any of that kind of thing. Like if you run out of something that you absolutely need, buy it. So those were kind of my rules, but that meant I couldn't buy things like clothes, shoes, books, magazines, anything for around the house. Like literally, unless it had some kind of purpose, and not the kind of purpose where you just talk yourself into needing it, which is what I used to do all the time. Like I think
Uh-huh.
you can justify just about any purchase that you want to make. But I really had to like learn how to think more critically and say like, do I actually need this in this moment? Like when I buy it, I'm literally going to get home and start using it. That was the only way I could buy something. And it started from a place of I had been debt free for a year. So there was a bit of misconception around it. Like I did it to pay off debt. Actually, I was already debt free. But the problem I noticed in the first year was that I basically went right back to spending all my money. So I didn't go back
Mm.
into debt, but I also wasn't saving anything. And considering that before, like when I was paying off my debt, there were months where I put up to 55% of my income towards debt repayment. I should have been able to save something. And
Mm-hmm.
I would get to the end of every month and look at my spreadsheet and be like, I saved maybe 5%, 10, maybe. And it just didn't feel good. And not for anyone else. Like it was purely for me, like, I want to save more money. I want to know what it feels like to have savings in the bank. This was something I had never experienced. And so I just decided to do this challenge. I kind of looked around my apartment at the time and thought, I don't really need anything. Like technically I'm fine. I'm in a position where, you know, I have clothes to wear and shoes to put on my feet and jackets to keep me warm and I'm okay. Like I don't actually need anything more. And so I entered it a little bit naively. I didn't really know what the year was going to look like, but I just thought, yeah, I could do that. Like of course I could do that. And like spoilers that I did, but there was so much that came up along the way that I hadn't anticipated. Things around like I didn't realize how much of an emotional shopper I was. How
Mm.
much like some people buy things to treat themselves or celebrate things, and I was not like that. I was so much more like when things were bad or I was feeling negative feelings, sadness, rejection, anything. I would buy something thinking it would make me feel better or it would make me better in some way. And I wasn't consciously aware of any of that stuff until I did that experiment. And yeah, I just learned a lot about myself, my consumption tendencies, shared all of that in the book. And you're right, though, like leading into a new year, I've even heard people say like the year of less has had a bit of a resurgence since even COVID. I think partially because at the beginning, I think so many people were stressed about money and so actually decided like I don't want to spend on anything unnecessary. Like I kind of need to hold on to whatever money I'm getting right now just with financial uncertainty. And so there was some of that aspect. Then there was also the aspect of people who were buying things honestly to cope, right? Like we were in
Mm-hmm.
lockdowns or whatever, and you started hearing so much more of all the online shopping that people were doing. And I remember hearing even just like from the mail lady that we have, her saying that it's busier than Christmas in like May and stuff like that. So there's all kinds of like I've seen the year of less have this little comeback this year because of that, and I don't know. I just think that we are in an interesting period right now where we are like if you're fortunate to not have been affected too negatively by the pandemic, there's a lot of us that are kind of sitting around going, what do I actually want on the other side of this? Like what do I want as we kind of transition in a different direction and things feel lighter and we're able to move around the world more freely and like what do I actually want? And experiments of any kind I think are great ways to kind of like tap into figuring that out.
Totally. And thinking critically like that, I mean, it feels at least that that was probably a pretty big catalyst in creating your new book. And what I love so much about your new book, Adventures in Opting Out, for everyone listening, is that it sort of shatters the idea that we all just naturally have our own path in life. Because I think so many of us do exactly what you say. And this is like right in the description of it on Amazon, how you say, like, we do what is expected of us. Or we follow what you call the invisible but well worn paths that lead us to what is culturally acceptable. And I mean, that can really end up making us feel more disconnected from ourselves and from what we really want in life. And then only when we feel disconnected enough and feel enough discomfort will we actually be ready to what you call opt out and actually create and forge our own way. And I love that. Can you dive into how you define opting out and what kind of inspired you to create an entire book around this idea?
Yeah, so I think, well, I'll share this. I use an analogy throughout the book of what it takes to complete a difficult hike. And the reason I chose that was because I do hike quite regularly now, but I was not that way when I was young. I was not outdoorsy at all. I was someone who I very much grew up with a lot of, or like what I was left with was a lot of like people pleasing and perfectionism. And so I was very much someone who was afraid to try new things. I was afraid to not only fail, but also afraid just to be different than what was expected or outlined sort of for me. And honestly, as the years go on, I'm only learning more and more about how deep that stuff really goes. But what happened was I noticed one day that when I was out on a hike by myself, I noticed finally like the voice in my head that always tells me to quit. Like it is there constantly, where this voice will be running through, or it's like this script that is just so perfected over the years of telling me things like no one would know, like no one can even see you right now. You could totally turn around and no one would see it. You're tired, like you don't want to do this, you can't do this. And I like there have been times where I've absolutely quit and turned around on those hikes. But as the years have gone on, I guess what's happened is it's become more of a conversation where I can, like, the script is happening and I'm constantly having to say, just keep going. Like, just go for a couple more minutes. Just like carry on for a little bit longer and see how you feel then. And then I always finish it. Like, it is so rare now for me to say, actually, I really don't want to do this. I am going to turn around. But it takes me a lot of work. It takes like a lot of internal pep talks to complete a hike. And I just thought, I bet that anyone who follows me on Instagram would not know that that is true for me. They would probably just think that I love hiking. Like, I'm just so happy when I'm out there all the time. And they would probably just assume that I'm loving every minute of it. And they would have no idea that this is the voice that's happening inside. Like, this is actually what's going on. And I thought it was after The Year of Less came out. So at the same time as sort of thinking about that, I was doing events back when we could do that. like getting to meet so many cool people, but also doing a Q&A at the end of every sort of talk or book event, and hearing the questions that were coming out of people's mouths. At every single event, there was a question along the lines of, did you lose anyone? Did your social life change? Did you lose any family, friends? Like, did people, I don't know, did you feel disconnected? Did you feel alone? And putting the two together, I just thought, especially in something sort of like The Year of Less would definitely be in sort of like the minimalism space of books. And I thought, in this space specifically, I do not see enough people talk about how when you decide to live differently, it is not always perfect. Like, I think especially in sort of minimalism, simple living, whatever, like we paint these very pretty pictures of how when you simplify, when you cut back, everything just gets better. And the reality is, like, some things get better, of course. And when you decide to be different, like, you also, yeah, you do lose people, or you do lose aspects of your social life, or you do find yourself feeling alone. It happens actually a lot. And it is something you have to get very comfortable with, not only potentially being alone or lonely, but standing out, feeling like the odd one out in conversations at times, really having to accept that some people will not maybe like the new you, or they won't want to go on that path with you. And and like how much work it takes then to do it, to make some life changes. It takes a lot of actually like inner pep talks. Like it takes a lot of emotional work on your end to live in a way that feels right for you when most of the rest of the people around you probably don't want you to do that. Or it's just very different from them and they just don't understand what you're doing.
Because it pushes them to look in the mirror and make some maybe uncomfortable observations, which, if you're not on the same growth journey, can be really, really hard.
Really hard. And as time has gone on, like even more has come from that, which is, I used to, in sort of early days of it, you'd get this sense of wanting to be a bit defensive or, have to argue your choices. The other people pleasing side might do things like tell people that they're right. You might even stop doing what you're doing and go back to what you were doing before so that you can stay connected to those people. There's all kinds of things, but as it goes on, I'm like, it's actually also you get to a place where you have to let go of people, right? Where you are outgrowing them. And so it's not actually so much about, oh, what do other people think and did they leave me? But when you really keep going, it's like, who are you going to let go of? Like which friends may not come with you, which family members may not come with you, or which boundaries do you have to change, relationships do you have to change, and some that may just have to end. And yeah, so that's a long way of saying like opting out is very much, I think of it as changing paths in life. So something that you were doing or thought you were supposed to do, deciding that it's not right for you anymore and that you want to at least try something different. But it felt really important that the book looked at the harder aspects of it, because I think especially in not just in minimalism and simple living, but self-help books in general, I feel like there's so much prescriptive content. There's so much like, here are the 10 steps, follow these, and sort of like, hopefully that works out for you. and we don't talk enough, I think, about the emotional aspect of what it's like when you do decide to change. And yeah, you do, like, you isolate yourself in that process sometimes if you don't have people who are doing it with you, and we don't talk enough about it. And I just thought we have to talk about this stuff so that we can equip each other. Like, it doesn't mean that we're saying like, oh yeah, now that you have the information, you'll be great and it's all going to be fine. It's like, no, let's just talk about the harder aspects so that we can equip each other and say, this could happen to you when you're out there, when whatever it is that you're doing, these are the things that could come up, and just know you're not alone. But like, we have to actually address it.
Oh, yeah. You dropped so many good nuggets there that I feel like we need to go back and unpack so much. But going back to one of the very first things you said in that, I think was so powerful, in that turning your inner monologue into a conversation and taking that monologue and turning it into a dialogue, and not just taking whatever your inner voice says and saying, you know what, it must be right, I'm running with it. But really understanding that oftentimes that's coming from your most primitive instincts, like a place of fear, a place that's there to just keep you safe. It's not there to be like, yeah, you go, girl, I'm going to encourage you to take risks and live your best life. Like, no, that's not what our brain is programmed to do. So just how seemingly simple, but how sometimes difficult and incredibly powerful it is all in one, to be able to be like, you know what, I feel like quitting, but I'm not going to quit just yet. I'm just going to go a little bit more and see what happens. And talking back to yourself like that, even out loud, I feel like, as crazy as that probably sounds, I feel like that helps a lot of times. Just be like, you know what? A little bit more. Like, I can do it. And then you're going to prove to yourself that you can retrain your brain, and it's all just going to keep building as you continue to grow on your own path. And like, wow, how powerful is that?
Yeah, it makes me think too, like, again, it could, depending on what you're doing, it could get to a place where you decide, I actually don't want to continue. But even just that you talk yourself into going a little bit more, like, you won't forget that. You won't forget. I think about this truly on a hike. Like, if you were standing in one spot and you thought, I can't go any further than this, and you went for just another minute, it's that reminder of like, actually, I could go a little bit more. I could. Like, physically, I am capable of it.
Yep.
So what else am I capable of that I'm potentially talking myself out of, or talking myself into thinking I can't do?
You're right. It really does transcend that, because I do that in my own workouts all the time, where it'll be, okay, you think you're done, just do one more curl. Just hold that plank for 5 more seconds. And it truly, if you do this, I like to work out first thing in the day because then you just feel so strong and powerful after that, where I just end up approaching my day completely differently, where I know it doesn't matter what comes through my inbox, it doesn't matter what kind of phone call I get. In the back of my head is I went a little bit further. I'm a little bit stronger than I thought I was when this day first started. And that does not just apply to like your physical strength and your physical workout, like your hikes. That carries into everything that you do where okay, I went a little bit further than I thought I could. So maybe I can go a little bit further in this, or maybe I'm a little bit stronger here. And it really just helps you learn your own strength and push your own limits because you're unlearning the limits that you thought you had.
Yeah, it's making me also think of like there's an aspect of the book which it's like I only really talk about it in a couple of chapters, but it feels like the most pivotal piece in a way, which is the idea of experimenting or just trying. I think that a big piece around opting out that I just want to, I don't know, it's like the topic I want to talk about forever and ever these days is that with opt-outs, with any decision that we make, we seem to have this idea that once we make the decision, we have to make that decision for life. Right? So it's like, oh, I've decided, like for that year, right? Or for adventures, I talk about the idea that I wanted to travel full time. And so that's what I wrote about. And I think that that decision could have been so scary if I had sat there and been like, well, if I do this, I'm nomadic forever. Like, that's a really scary decision. And I don't know that I want that to be true. And so even with that, I had to say, well, I'll just try with like a couple of trips and we'll see what this year looks like. Right. And if in 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, I decide I actually do want to settle down somewhere, okay. Like it's just something for a period of time. But yeah, and like giving yourself that permission. So it just speaks to the same thing of like giving yourself permission to just try a little bit more. It does not have to be forever, and you do not have to do the thing always until the end of your time here. Like it's just, you're allowed to make a choice that's good for now, like good for what you're feeling right now, and to just keep making it until it feels good.
Absolutely. We've talked about this on Thrive before, the idea that in today's day and age, it's almost like we forget to allow ourselves to be a beginner at something. It's like we are just constantly bombarded with messaging about how you're a boss and you're a baller and you can run the marathon and do the dang thing, which is great to a certain extent, but then it can have this adverse effect where we forget that not everybody just ups and runs a marathon tomorrow. Like, step one is you got to get a pair of running sneakers. Step two is you got to be able to walk to the stop sign at the end of the cul-de-sac, and then you got to be able to run a little bit and then a little bit more. It's like, it is not just this up and do it and figure it all out and have it all right now because you say so kind of thing. So we don't always allow ourselves the grace to be a beginner and try something new and maybe get it wrong a couple of times before we get it right. It's like there's just such a pressure to do it now, do it big, do it right, and then keep on going and go and do all of the things. And it's like, wow, just take a step back. Start small. Just start somewhere, and it's okay.
Oh my gosh, even just like remembering that kind of messaging is exhausting to just even think about. The expert thing too, I think is such an interesting topic. It's one for me, I think as a writer, it feels very important to me that I actually don't ever want to become an expert on one topic. It does not interest me. I don't want to be the expert on minimalism or not shopping and some people do. Some people like get so into a subject that they own it and they just want to learn more and know the most and help the most on that thing. And I actually think like if you are an expert at it, like it's almost a way of saying you have nothing left to learn. And so yeah, I'm like, I loved that, the like everything is small steps. Also because I think that something we don't talk about is when you get to the so-called finish line, it doesn't like end there. Or like I guess it could for some things. Like you could get to an end and just be like, okay, well I did that thing and now like on to the next. But oftentimes with like a life change specifically, it is a decision that you're going to make forever. Like you're going to have to decide always, like, do I want to keep doing this or don't I? Like what works for me, what doesn't? I think of something specifically like drinking. I don't drink anymore, and I stopped when I was in my 20s. And something like that is because I'm not an alcoholic, that technically is a decision that I could go back on if I wanted to. But it's a conscious choice all the time. Like, nope, that actually just doesn't work for me. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Like, but I have to keep making that choice. So,
Yeah. You mentioned this earlier too, and I know this is obviously a big part of the book, but since you've hiked like literal mountains before, walk us through the parallels between going a different path in life and the psychological work that it takes to summit a mountain. I mean, I know your book is sectioned off
mm,
into these like mountain climbing metaphors and hiking metaphors, like the base, the viewpoint, the valley, the slope, the summit. But for us non-mountain climbers in the house,
yeah.
give us the lowdown of what that actually looks like in everyday life.
Yeah. Yeah. So I broke it up like that because here were my thoughts. So with opting out, let's start at the base. To me, like the base of a hike is literally the spot where you step up and you're about to begin. Now, for me, when I was thinking of opting out, the base is actually more like the period of time that you think about the opt out. Like it, and all like the mental and perhaps physical, depending on what it is, work that it takes to get to the place where you are ready to begin. And in my experience, I have lived in the base for so long sometimes, like even longer than the opt out takes to complete. Um, because for me, that is where there can be so much emotional work. There are like, I face a lot of my fears, I actually feel like, before I even begin. Like, for most of the things that I've done, I think I'm way more afraid before I actually start,
Mm.
right? And then as I keep going, some of the fears come true to maybe a degree, but it's never like as bad. So much of it is preemptive. And so it can take a lot for me to begin something. So that's what I looked at for the base of like, what does it take to actually get to the place where you make the decision? You are going to do the opt out. The viewpoint was the next section. And that is something that when you're hiking, not all hikes have this, but typically some will have some kind of spot where you can see what the point of it is. Like you can see a beautiful view, or you can see the summit up ahead, and there's something about it that just feels like so empowering, and you want to go get it. Like there's some kind of moment where you're like, oh yes, this is going to be worth it. Like it's probably going to be hard still, but it's going to be worth it. And when you're opting out, if you're picking the one that's right for you, this is like a very clear distinction. If you're picking the right opt out for you, something should happen very early on that shows you that you're on the right path. Like it will show you. So this can be simple. This could be something like maybe you've been questioning taking something out of your diet as an example because it just hasn't made you feel good. So for me, I do not eat dairy. It's not because I have an intense allergy, but I don't feel good when I eat dairy. So as soon as me like take it out, I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel so much better in XYZ reasons. That is a viewpoint, right? That is just like a, yes, this was a right choice. Um, so some are more obvious, some are more subtle, but there should be something that happens early on to show you that you're on the right one. If you were to start an opt out, like you changed in some way, and it's actually just really hard right at the beginning, you will not hit the viewpoint yet. And actually, I think that that's a really key part of it for some people. Like it's important to be able to recognize that because of course there's going to be challenges ahead, but it shouldn't be hard right from the start. Like if you're making a life change that is right for you, there's something about it that should feel easy, or you should be able to ease into pieces of it. So if it's too challenging right at the start, it might not be the right one, or maybe you need to kind of shift how you're approaching it. Like maybe you're approaching it from a way you've seen other people approach it, but actually you need to figure out what's right for you. But yeah, my friend David, actually, I interviewed him for the book, he's someone who does a ton of experiments. Like it's just, he's literally written a blog just about mostly him doing these different experiments on himself. And we went through all the ones that are listed on his site. And I looked at all the ones that were like successful, so called, like he completed them, and which ones weren't. And we went through and I started asking about some of the ones that did or didn't work. And we figured out that the ones that he didn't carry on with were the ones that they were too hard. There was no viewpoint. So it was too much of a challenge. It was like he bit off way more than he could chew, or it wasn't really actually his goal. It was like a goal he'd seen a lot of other people doing and was just like, well, I should do that too. Like, well, maybe that's not right for you though.
I see that all the time, and maybe you can relate to this since you had a past as a blogger as well. I see this all the time now because when I started, I'm sure when you started, this whole like influencer marketing thing wasn't a thing.
Totally.
And it was very much people who wanted to write and who were truly writing as a creative outlet. It was not like this Insta famous thing that it is now. And I see so many people will come to me now, having done it for so long and having it be my full-time job, saying, oh, that looks really fun and cool what you do. I want to get paid to share cool products. How do I do it? And I'm like, oh, you gotta want to do it for more reasons than that, because it'll be a lot harder once you're in it. And sure enough, it's like the people who end up trying it for the wrong reasons, or not necessarily wrong reasons, but reasons that aren't in alignment with what they truly love doing themselves. I'm like, those are the people who never make it in that. It's like you have to actually love writing and actually love creating content. And if you're just here to do what you think makes a quick buck, hey, you're going to fall out of love with it really quickly, because you're going to realize it's A, not a quick buck, and B, involves a lot of work that if you're not passionate about doing, okay, your whole life now is going to be doing a task or doing jobs that you don't actually love. It's going to very quickly feel out of alignment with, like, I don't know, who you are as a human being, and it's not going to fly. So same sort of thing where you're like, it has to go with like what you do as a person and what you like to do as a human being every single day. And if it's not in alignment with that, no amount of money can really, shake that and change that.
Totally. It that also just makes me think, like, this is why a lot of people probably don't, and I can't say this for sure, but it feels true. This is why a lot of people wouldn't be able to meet their New Year's resolutions. It is not because they don't want to do the thing. It's often because they're just picking the thing either that everyone else is doing. Like, oh, everyone else is doing this thing, so like I'll do it too. But like, is that right for you? Is that the one? Like, if you were to pick one thing, is that the thing that you want to change this year? Or they pick it for some kind of reason that's around like self-loathing. Like, oh, I don't like this about myself. I'm going to do this thing that maybe will make me like myself better. Like, no, that's not a place to change from. Like, a place to change from is, I'm pretty content with like most things. I would really like, what am I craving? I'm really craving more of this in my life, or I'm really noticing that I don't feel good, say, if I'm always watching TV right before bed. So I want to change that thing. But it's not self-loathing. It's like, what's going to make me feel better? Like,
it's like loving. It's like self-love and turning the self-loathing into self-loving. I love that. And how powerful that is too, especially thinking about New Year's resolutions and whatnot, because I really think so much comes down to our individual perspectives that we take. I mean, hell, it's the whole point of this podcast, like thriving instead of surviving, and that the choices that go into that. But it's like, if you're so focused on something as a resolution or as a goal, whatever you want to call it, but it's coming from that negative place, now I feel like you risk obsessing over something, and the entire mindset and the entire perspective is one that's pretty negative, because it's like you said, it's coming from self-loathing or hating something. So now every single time you're working towards it, it's all coming from that negative place of, oh, I hate this about myself, or I don't want to be like this and this. And how powerful it would be if we could all just do what you said and shift that to a place of, instead, self-love. What do we want more of in our lives? What's the positive? What's the newfound positivity that we want to bring into our lives, and just coming at it from that place of more and positivity, versus that it's like it could still be the same end goal, but just the entirety of how we approach it would just feel different. And maybe it would be more approachable for the long haul, because you're not feeling horrible about yourself every time you go to work on your goal.
Oh my gosh, yes. It makes me think, well, actually, or more just want to share two journal prompts that I've been using this year for myself is one of them is what would the version of myself who loves myself do?
Ooh, so good.
Like if you just loved yourself, what would you do in this situation? And then another one is for especially if you have like future goals or things that you want, especially if some things we have to think very long term because we don't know when we're going to be able to do some things again. But I sort of remember like what would or would this be helpful for future Cait? Like, am I helping future Cait right now? And a one for that is that like I have these ideas of like long walks that I would like to do in the UK. Um, and I will not be able to magically just do those one day. Like right now, I have to be walking a lot in prep, whether it's 1 year, 3 years, 5 years from now, that one day I would like to do these very long walks over there. So I need to start walking now. Like I need to walk more regularly now for the thing that I think I want to do later.
Mm-hmm. That's so good.
Um, for the rest of the analogy, I mean, after the viewpoint, which honestly, there is this part of the viewpoint where, in my experience, especially with like certain actual hikes, if you can see, like when you're at the viewpoint, if you can look ahead and kind of see how much work it's going to take to get to the end, this is actually, I think, also a spot where you can talk yourself into quitting like very easily because you did see something beautiful right at the start. This is also why I think sometimes we quit changes that we want to make because we saw some kind of progress very early and we're like, oh sweet, like I did it, and then you just like quit. It's like, well, if you actually want to do it, you do have to keep going. But yeah, so for me, there's always some period there of like questioning, do I want to keep going? Which generally just becomes the question that I need to then have a dialogue with for the whole rest of it. Because from the viewpoint, I talk about what it's like to step into the valley. And this one truly comes up for me when I'm out physically hiking, because often, like, you can see that you're hiking into a valley. You can see you're going down, down, down into a valley of some sort. And when I think about like day hikes with a valley, it means that if you're hiking down, when you turn around, you're also going to hike
Like
back
back
up.
up.
You're going to have to redo all of that. And so I always look at it and just go, oh my gosh, do I really want to do this in the other direction? Like, but the valley is the place, I think, where because you've chosen to keep going, it is the place where you do find that you are walking further away from the life that you were living. So that includes the people that you were walking the original path with. And I also think that if there's any point in the valley where you stumble, it comes up with a lot of self-doubt and a lot of questioning. Like a lot, you can feel lost, you can feel confused. Like, what was my original goal? What am I even doing here? I thought I knew like why I was making this life change. Does it still feel true? Has any like what's going on here? It's really hard if you don't have anyone in your life to talk to about it. So I find like with a lot of opt-outs that I've done, well, maybe a couple, I've had a friend or two who kind of understood it, but more often than not, the reason they're opt-outs is because I don't actually have anyone. It's like I'm choosing to stand alone. And so the feeling of being alone in that is another one that can make you want to go back to the way that it was before. And so
Mm-hmm.
it takes a lot. And it was the biggest section in the book. And I just thought that it needs to be like, it needs to be the biggest section in the book because it is the hardest section to navigate in a life change. Um, from there, if you do decide to keep going, which I find most people do, I mean, I think especially like once you've worked through what comes up in the valley, you know that it was hard, but you also got a lot of perspective on the fact that you don't want to go back to exactly what it was before. Like there are benefits, or have been enough benefits that you have decided to keep going, and so you can't go back. And I think the valley is really where we change. Whether like it doesn't matter kind of how small or big the shift is, that is where we change. And so the steps out of it in either direction, like even if you decided to quit in the valley and go back, you're still going back different. And so like life is still going to be different in some way. Maybe how you relate to people could change a little bit. Like something is still shifted in there. But if you decide to keep going, so I wrote about the slope. Slope on a mountain or a hike is literally just the side, like a side. Like just imagine a slow climb up to the end. Um, but I talk about on the slope specifically, I feel like that is actually where the dialogue begins, where the old voice is still there, but you have decided to keep going. And so that is, instead of just maybe self-sabotaging or giving in, that is the place where you're saying, like, you can still hear the old stuff, but you're also saying to yourself, like, no, I want to keep doing this. I want to, even though it could take a while, like, I want to keep doing this. And then the summit, I mean, on a mountain is so obvious. It is a place you get the most beautiful viewpoint. You can tell you're there often because other people are also there. Like, you're often not alone when you are on a summit of an actual mountain. Like someone is typically up there with you. And people are celebrating and they're happy and they might be like having snacks or water. Like it's so obvious when you get there. The summit of an opt-out I actually find is so subtle you'll probably even miss it, because it's just the day that it stops being a struggle. Like it is just the way that you are living your life, and that you're not sitting there having to do the dialogue anymore. You're not having to encourage yourself to keep going. You're just saying, like, I'm here. I have made this change. This is part of my life now. And I almost feel like it just becomes the new baseline then. Like that is the new place that you then, if you keep opting out, which everyone I talk to for the book has opted out of lots of things. Like everyone starts with one and it ends up being that they make tons of life changes. But that's your new baseline. Like that is the new starting point.
It's funny. I just talked about this with someone on a past episode about how so often we end up thinking that that final goal is like when we've made it and we just keep pushing. We end up having like this destination mindset where you're like, well, if only once I get there, it'll be good. Once I weigh this amount, or once I look like this, or once I can do this, then it's like a if then kind of thing. And we forget that that end destination is not actually where the change happens. That's just like the arrival point. And like you said, half the time you can miss it because that's not where the transformation is happening. The transformation is happening in the valley and on the slope up. Everything like you just said, it's like doing that hard, dirty work is where you are becoming stronger and where you're changing as a person. And then like you said, it's like, all right, now it's done. It's not a struggle anymore. So now you're there, but that's not where you are actually transforming. So
Yeah.
it's crazy.
Well, and I think about the summit too. It's like that was the goal. The goal, like, what was the life change that you wanted? Like, you just are living it now. Great, that's amazing. Like, but still, we miss it because it's subtle.
Yeah.
Right? But that is it. So a big thing that feels important is like you might miss the actual summit, like the actual day that it stopped being a struggle. But I think it's really important to acknowledge, and whether it's some kind of celebration just for yourself, celebration can be as big or small as you like, but taking some kind of moment to like take stock of what has happened and what you've done is so important. It is something I've never been great at. And that's why I'm like, they can be very tiny. It can be just for you. You don't have to tell anybody about it. But when you can see it, when you can see that it's no longer a struggle and it just is the way that you're living, that is absolutely worth celebrating because it was hard. Like it was hard, whatever the change was. And so, yeah, why wouldn't you celebrate kind of the growth and everything that's come up along the way?
Yeah. How do you assess risk? Because I see so many people who stay on their current path because of fear of the unknown, or maybe just the idea that the risks are too high or too much to take on. So what sort of guidance can you give for practical folks who aren't even necessarily totally risk averse, but want to find a realistic baseline for determining if a new adventure is worthwhile and when?
Yeah. I think the thing that works for me, and I will preface this by saying I am someone who is more, like, typically more on the anxious side of things. is that this is an anxious thing as well, is like you need to prepare for all possible situations almost, and like how you will handle it. So if you have really bad anxiety and you don't know what's coming up ahead, you almost need to plan out like 3 or 4 different scenarios and literally know what you would do. Even just like not a step by step, but like with anxiety it would be like there probably is a component of actually like good self-soothing tactics, like how can you calm yourself, how can you remind yourself that like you're grounded, you're here, you're safe, you're fine. But yeah, depending on what it is, I will often come up in my head with like what are 3 or 4 of like the worst case scenarios and what would they be. So like when travel was a specific one of giving up my place to travel full time. Questions were like well, I guess like worst case scenarios were like, what if at some point it just like doesn't work? It's like, okay, then I have to come up with the scenario that I stay with my dad for a couple months and I find a new place to live. Like, and that's just that. Or I don't have the money. Okay, then I have to get a job, or like I have to figure something else out. Um, Medical related, it's like adding, making sure you have medical insurance. It was really like so many different things. A big one also was, what if I can't afford to go back to the city that I was living in, which I loved. I loved it there, and it was very like it was expensive already, but the costs were only going up. And like for that one, I just had to get to a place where I said, okay, like if I don't get to go back there, then I don't get to go back there. And I don't carry forward until I get to a place where I'm okay with those things. And that's all part of the base. That's all part of that early section of like coming up with these thoughts before you even begin. But it is, yeah, it's still a lot. Like with something like drinking, when I decided to stop drinking, I remember very early on, one of my concerns was, what if I lose friends? And or what if I don't ever find a man who's fully comfortable with the fact that I don't drink?
Mm.
And that not that that is true, because there are lots of also sober men or just men who don't drink that much, but in the circle that I was in, that would have been true if I had stayed just in that circle, right? So it's like it has required, oh yeah, I have lost friends. I've also made some incredible new friends obviously in these years, but I have lost friends, and I have had to change the circle that I'm in so that I do find people who are open and accepting of that side of me. Okay. Like, so it is all to say, like, the fear comes with you. You do not get to just kick it away and it never comes back. Like, the fear joins you on the ride, but I think that I definitely, like, I have to get to a place where I'm comfortable with many possible scenarios before I'll even begin.
It's like the fear joins you on the ride, but you are in a position where you can talk back to it
Yeah.
comfortably.
Yeah. And to say, like, literally do your worst. I can deal with it. Try me. Try your worst. Like if I can get to a place where I trust that I can, like I have the resilience to at least come up with a solution. Like I may not know what's coming up ahead, because you don't. Like there are things that are going to come up that you did not plan for. But if you've come up with what felt like your worst case scenario, you are equipped for anything else. Like
Mm-hmm.
you are equipped. We don't always feel it, but we have it within us to deal with tough situations.
Yeah, it's like you might not feel ready, but you can be prepared.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yes.
So,
Totally.
you've mentioned a couple times also about, okay, losing people, very real possibility along the way. How did you handle that personally? And what would you tell others who might be holding themselves back or scared to opt out of one thing and into another because of that fear?
Mm.
Like what does that practically look like for you when you are like, you know what, this might be the conversation that has to happen. Here's how I approach it.
So I'll say like every relationship or friendship is different, because
Totally.
some get conversations and some don't, right? Like some things just end and one or both people don't talk about it. Um, so I'd say like it's hard to give an answer that would work for just one thing. I would say a few things that have helped me. One is the general understanding that we can often only see as far for others as we see for ourselves.
Mm,
And to hold on to that means not only that you can see why some people might not be joining you, but also why you might not be right for other people anymore. Like why you might decide other people are not right for you anymore either. it helps when people throw comments or questions or concerns at you that don't feel good, like they don't feel supportive, right? It's like they're sharing the things that they are afraid of or that they wouldn't want to be true for them. But it doesn't mean it has to have anything to do with you. Like they're just sharing, like people say like they're just projecting, and like yes, but truly like try to put yourself in their shoes. Like oftentimes we give advice or we share comments and stuff because we think it might be helpful, but actually we're just expressing what would be coming up for us personally. And so I think that helps when you see that other people might be being hurtful or that you might need to let them go. But it's also helpful to know, like, if that's how you're starting to feel about some of the people who you were bringing along, it might be okay to let them go. I think something that helps me too is knowing that if you're holding on to something that isn't quite working, you're actually trapping both people.
Mm.
It's not healthy or loving to be holding on to something that isn't working. And that does not mean that letting go is super easy, like by any means. But it's when you can see that it's a lot more compassionate to let go. And let go doesn't even have to mean like goodbye forever. It can literally just be like loosening your grip on it, like just releasing a little bit of your grip on it and being like, I just trust that we're both going to do our thing for a while. And if we're meant to come back together, we will. We will find a way. We will talk again one day and like that'll be fine. But just being like, I don't have to hold on so tightly right now. Like just like let go for a bit. Also because in the letting go, like it's scary to let go of things, but I always find like if I create space in my life, then really good and supportive things come in. And sometimes that's in the form of other people. Sometimes it's just in tools or therapy or something. Like I just find like if you can create a little bit of space, like good things will come in, or you will at least start to see an opportunity for some good things to come in. But what I like, it feels really important to say this, that if you do lose a friend or a family member because of a choice that you have made, it is also okay and actually really important to grieve that. I think that if it feels final, if it feels like that friendship is gone forever, that relationship is gone forever, it is actually really important to grieve that and to not just get defensive or get hurt or whatever. Like you're allowed to grieve that loss.
Mm-hmm.
And it's part of the healing process. And it's also part of the process of like, if you can heal from that loss, you can start to open up a little bit for like something else to enter. But it's really important to not completely bypass your feelings on it.
So, so, so important. I'm really glad you mentioned that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Cait, thank you so much for coming on Thrive. This has been such a good conversation, and I'm sure people are really just like feeling all the feels right now from that. I want to close out by asking you something that I ask everyone who comes on the Thrive podcast. And that is, what does thrive mean to you? And how do you strive to thrive in your own everyday life?
It would probably come together. I think that for like the answers to those will come together. I think that thriving to me would mean making sure I'm continually growing. And that does not mean I have to like climb a ladder and grow in like some way for other people. But to me, growing means like if I can see something in myself that maybe I'm curious about or I want to experiment with, see if doing something different would be healthier or better for me in some way, that I'm constantly doing that in service of the fact that I think it will all help me be a better person, a better friend, a better writer, I guess, too. But like for me to live in a way that feels really aligned includes growth. I don't know if that's like a very clear answer, but I
Yeah,
think,
always open to opting out of one thing and into another.
yeah. And I think like the practice of self-awareness is where all of
Mm-hmm.
that comes from, which I think, I mean, blogging is where all of that started. I've had people say, and I've really only started to understand this, but I've had people say like, oh, you're so self-aware. You so, like know exactly who you are and what's working and what's not working. And it's like, well, yeah, I've been blogging for like 10 years. So I'm like very openly. So I'm like that it is a constant practice. of reflection
Mm-hmm.
and experimentation and figuring out what's right and what's not for you. So
Yeah. Awesome.
yeah.
Well, Cait, tell us where everyone can get their hands on a copy of your new book and where else people can find you online if they want to connect with you more.
Yeah, so I think Adventures is pretty much everywhere at this point. Um, but online, the only place I really hang out is Instagram. I do have a newsletter, but I'm like Instagram is the one and only.
Where
So
it's at.
just at Cait Flanders.
Awesome. Wait, before you go, if you like what you just listened to, drop us 5 stars on iTunes. Make sure you're subscribed to never miss an episode of Thrive. And if you're on Instagram, snap a screenshot and share to your story with what episode you're tuning into and tag me at Erica Lagenza with what part resonated with you the most. That way I can see what's helping you and your friends can pick up a helpful tidbit too. Thanks for tuning in. It's your time to thrive.